Good morning, everyone. Before we send the kids off, I wanted to do something. We did this 2 years ago, and we have changed drastically in 2 years. Not just in size, but some of you have switched seats. And so that's huge for some of you. I'm going to take a little video of you saying Merry Christmas, and we're going to post this on our Facebook page, okay? So on the count of, whoa, see? Man, see? I can't get everybody. All right, on the count of 3, you're going to say Merry Christmas. 1, 2, 3. Excellent. Thank you, guys. All right, Junior Church, you are dismissed to walk. I know he was ready to go. He didn't want to. As we do every year, the kids are going to go have a birthday party. Adults, you're not welcome, basically. They're going to have cake, marshmallows, and games. You guys get to listen to me. Yeah. It's about the same. Yeah. Are you saying I'm fluffy? We have been coming home for Christmas. Coming home means getting ready, which was our first sermon, getting ready for the whole thing, not going through the motions, being authentic. We've asked the question, what do you want for Christmas? And looked into that and realized we need to see what God wants to give us because of what we need. Through all this, we have learned that the spirit of Christmas is relationship, beginning with our relationship through Jesus Christ, and then on to the rest of our friends and family. Today, we see to have a Merry Christmas involves relationship. It seems that God screams this message to us every year through the writers of stories and songs and movies, and yet so many times we think the spirit of Christmas is giving, or we think the spirit of Christmas is tradition, or we think the spirit of Christmas is something else when it's always about relationship. Think about it for a moment. The primary message of the classic Dickens story, A Christmas Carol, relationships. Of having proper relationships with people. What about the 1946 classic, It's a Wonderful Life? Look at all the relationship that he had. Miracle on 34th Street. See, even the stories of our secular Christmas traditional movies tell us the Christmas spirit is relationship. And relationships are hard. If everybody was as perfect as me, we would just get along just fine. Okay, so maybe if they were as perfect as you, yeah, that deserves the same chuckle. Come on. Families are having annual Christmas gatherings, and whether we want to accept it or not, there are times that our families just don't get along. For whatever reason, certain family members are in the same room, these tensions can rise. People start walking on eggshells. Conversations become shallow, hoping that we don't trigger those certain topics that explode into a fight or fury. I know there are people here today that are going to say, well, my family doesn't do that. We are perfect. That's not true. If you want to believe that, you are deluding yourself, no one else. Okay, because we are all fallen. We are all messed up people. But guess what? You're not alone in having a dysfunctional family. Families have been struggling in their relationship since the first argument in the Garden of Eden. When she said, it's not my fault, it's him. And he was saying, not my fault, it's her. And they started arguing. Since then, we've had a problem with relationships. Today, we're going to talk about a Christmas tree. And this one is going to look very similar to Charlie Brown's weird little ugly malnourished tree. But it's not the typical Christmas tree that we're going to think of. It's a tree that is most often neglected at Christmas time. But from a biblical perspective, it is the first thing recorded in the New Testament. It is Jesus's family tree. And so we're going to look at this family tree, this first Christmas tree, which concludes with the beginning of the story of Jesus' birth. The fact that Jesus opens his gospel with a list of names. And if you remember a few months ago when we were in Romans and I wanted to skip a bunch of names and I thought, we'll just get to the point. Well, God knows our names. And so based on that, when I was looking at this, names tell us that God values us individually. He values who we are. And for Matthew to write this, it means there is something important in this family tree. If we understand the Jewish people in Jesus' day, we know family trees are very important. My wife took some time, about 3 or 4 years, researching her family tree and everything, and she found out she is royal. Why is that so funny? She is related to royalty in England, in Spain, in Norway, Robert the Bruce in Scotland. She's related to them. She's a royal pain, a royal. And then she started looking up my family tree, and guess what? You can't find anything. They don't keep track of peasants. That was what I kept saying. But family trees are important. And we want to know where we've come from and how far the lineage goes and see how we connect. Well, let's look and see how Jesus' family tree is. First thing I'm going to say, I may mispronounce these names. They're not here to correct me, so it's okay. So let's go. Verse 1. This is a record of the ancestors of Jesus, the Messiah, a descendant of David and of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Abinadab. Aminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. In the midst of these, and we're going to keep going, but in the midst of these great branches of Jesus' family tree, we find something very unexpected. Something that would seem flawed if we didn't look at it through biblical perspectives. In this great family tree, which gives us Jesus, we discover what appears to be a very dysfunctional family. A very dysfunctional family tree. We live in a world that is starving for love. Just take for a moment and surf the web and read the ads that pop up on all the search engines. People do not want to be forgotten. They want to be remembered. They want to be loved. They do all these things just to acquire someone's attention, which is equal to love. People don't want to be forgotten. Nothing is more terrible than to be alone, is what we think. Every national newspaper carries a page of personals. Someone looking for someone, anyone willing to do anything to be remembered and have that love. Throughout our community, you'll find people who are forsaken, who are left alone, pushed away, or abandoned. In Genesis 38, we're going to look at someone who is never associated with Christmas, and yet they're in this Christmas tree. We read a story of a forsaken woman named Tamar. When her first husband dies, she is alone and her dreams of a family are broken. And according to the customs of that time, Judah, her father-in-law, gave her his second son so that she could start producing heirs and somebody could start taking care of her so she wouldn't be forgotten. So he gave her his second son as a husband, but this man did not love her. He was willing to share the pleasures of being married, but determined that he would not give her children. And then he died. You can just imagine the rustle of whispers that seem to follow Tamar. She's a black widow. She is devoid of life, no children. They've escaped her. No man survives her company. With only one son left, Judah makes a promise he has no intention of honoring. Wait until my youngest son grows up, and then I'll give him to you for a husband. But for now, just live in your father's house as a widow. Weeks turn to months, months turns to a year. Tamar's long past the normal time of mourning period for her husbands, and she's left mourning for herself. She's a forsaken woman, living out of loneliness, aching for someone to love her, to want her, to desire her. One by one, the young women around her are married to men, and babies become children, and children become teenagers, and sorrow within her turns to angerness and bitterness. Her biological clock is ticking. Then Judah's wife dies. Tamar, the forsaken woman, has been forgotten. No wedding is coming, no feast, no groom, no wedding night, no children, no future, only being alone. And then she does something that causes everybody to go, whoa. Is it lust that drives Tamar to disguise herself as a prostitute and wait on the road for her father-in-law? No, it is not lust. Is it anger? No. Anger requires passion, and Tamar is too bitter for passion. It is emptiness, it is loneliness, it is desperation. How could he leave her alone? How could he forsake her? How could he break his promise? She's waited half her life for this. When the act is done, Tamar is pregnant by her father-in-law. He's unaware of what's going on, and she takes his seal and staff as a deposit for payment and then disappears. When the news breaks of her pregnancy, Judah is outwardly furious and inwardly delighted. Finally, I'm going to be rid of this black widow who kills my sons. It is Judah who judges her, sees the penalty, and calls it death by fire. As the flames are crackling in the background, and I really want us to get this is part of Jesus' family tree. As the flames are crackling in the background, the family is assembled to witness this grisly execution. Tamar, the 3-month pregnant, betrothed widow, draws from her robes the seal and the staff. And she says, these belong to the father of my child. Perhaps you'll ensure they're given to the rightful owner. In front of everybody where she was supposed to be disgraced, in front of everybody where she was supposed to be penalized for her sin, she holds up truth. And Judah's statement is both a pardon and a confession. She is more righteous than I. Judah sees the line of sin. Because of sin, Tamar was forgotten. She was forsaken. Not her sin, but Judah's sin. And she's in the line. She's in that lineage that Matthew has given us to remind us that among the branches of Jesus' family tree is the branch of Tamar, the forsaken, forgotten woman. And so we can look at this tree and realize in Jesus, no one is forsaken. No one is forgotten. Ephesians 1:6 tells us that when we've been accepted into Him, we have been accepted into the beloved one, to a world that is starving for love and acceptance. The message of Christmas calls the lonely to come home, to come to the one who knows them best. And we need to realize that in this lineage, in the Jewish times, they wouldn't put ladies because that was anti-custom. And yet in this lineage, we see Tamar. And God is proudly and boldly saying to all of you who feel forsaken, you feel forgotten, you feel abandoned, Christ came for you to take you home. Our world is starving for love, but our world is also a very fearful place. Today, billions of dollars are being spent worldwide to prepare for the possibility of biological warfare, fear. There's also people worldwide who are digging out bunkers in case of a zombie apocalypse. And they're spending millions of dollars on all of this. What do you fear? If we're honest, we can name something. Maybe we fear failure. Maybe we fear disgrace or rejection. Ultimately, many of us fear death. Death destroys everything we've worked so hard to accomplish. And we insure against our losses. Our house insurance, car insurance, credit card insurance, travel insurance, employment insurance, life insurance. We are scared of things being taken away from us. Verse 4 of the Christmas tree. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Again, I just said that ladies were not generally involved in this lineage, so why? Rahab. Rahab was a fearful woman. Tamar pretended to be a prostitute. Rahab did not. She was. But unlike modern prostitutes, she was wealthy and respected among the heathen people in Jericho. We read the story in Joshua 2 and chapter 6. She is one who hid the spies who come to scout the city of Jericho. It is these spies that hide in her dwelling, in her wealth. I mean, she was very wealthy. She lived in a prominent place. And in this time when she's there, she expresses the terror that she and her countrymen fear. God's people are coming, and she is scared. As the whole area. There's an understanding that nothing can stop the God that Israel serves. And she knows that the God of Israel is more than a match than all the idols that are within her city walls. Rahab, the fearful, begs these spies for her life and the lives of those of her family. The spies agree to spare her so long as she is willing to display this scarlet cord from her window when the Israelites arrive at Jericho. And then Joshua 6 tells of this magnificent defeat that God inflicts on the Canaanites in Jericho when the walls come down, and the only survivors after this thing are Rahab and her family. And you read in Joshua 6 that they were taken from Jericho and set outside of the camp. They weren't accepted. They were brought into the area, but you got to stay over there because you're foreigners. But that's not the end of the story. If it were to end there, we might assume that Rahab and her family went on their way, found another dwelling, and picked up where they left off. But Matthew gives us a surprising end when he reveals that Rahab, the temple prostitute of Jericho, is the great ancestral grandmother in line of Christ. There was a man named Salmon, it says, when he looked on Rahab, he loved her. Now, according to the law of Moses, Rahab, being who she was, Rahab the beautiful, Rahab the wealthy, Rahab the living shrine of idolatry, would have had to have her beauty taken away. She would have had to have her head shaved, her fingernails all cut, her jewelry and fine clothes exchanged for the Israelite robes. She would have had to live as a betrothed woman for a certain set of time, proving that she has rid herself of idolatry. And only then could an Israelite man be permitted to take her as his wife. So deep is this gratitude and faith of Rahab that she becomes the wife of Salmon and a member of the genealogy of Jesus. Rahab doesn't have to hide anymore. The fear is gone. She is confident because she has true love. See, the message of Christmas calls for the fearful to have confidence. We need this message. Don't let fear guide your life, because God has chosen you. God has chosen you. He's called you to join his family into the spirit of Christmas, which is relationship. And that gives you confidence. No matter what the world may say of you, no matter where the world may put you, God chose you. And so you can let go of fear and hold on to confidence. So among the branches of Jesus' family tree, we find Rahab, the fearful woman. But in Jesus, we discover that true love, perfect love, drives out fear. 1 John says it, as we live in God, our love grows more perfect. So we will not be afraid on the day of judgment, but we can face him with confidence. because we live like Jesus here in this world. Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment, and this shows that we have not fully experienced His perfect love. If you are fearing the day of judgment, you haven't grabbed a hold of Jesus. That's what He just said. If you fear that you're not good enough, then you don't know Jesus. Perfect love pushes out the fear, and you can stand confidence. I know I'm not good enough, but I know Jesus has paid for it. I know that I am a sinful and undeserving person, but God has proclaimed me His own. And I have confidence because He has called me. It's part of the message of Christmas. More things are plaguing our world. Racism is a sin, yet it pervades our world, our culture. Our attitudes towards others based on color of skin, the language they speak, the clothing they wear. While there are many minorities in the world, there is a greater spiritual reality. It is the reality that we have all lived as spiritual foreigners to God and His family. Not just as foreigners, but we have all lived as enemies of God. Enemies and rebels to God's plan and purpose. Look at verse 5. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse. Ruth is the third woman mentioned in Jesus' family tree. Ruth was a foreigner, not only a foreigner, but a Moabite, a member of the race that proved to be an enemy, an oppressor of God's people of Israel. Imagine how she would have walked the streets of Bethlehem and noticed the stares, the sidelong glances at her unusual complexion, to know that every word she spoke revealed her foreign dialect, to know that she was a foreigner, an outsider in the midst of the hometown of Israel. And yet there's something amazing that happens. She meets Boaz, and he gives her favor, and he's kind to her. And she says, "Why do you show a favor to me, a foreigner?" She even realizes, I don't deserve this. I'm worse than your servants because of my lineage, of who I am. Ruth recognized her own status and position in the land of Israel. It's at her mother-in-law's insistence that she finds Boaz and says, "Ask him to marry you." Who said it's the man's job to propose? Because apparently in the Bible, she proposed there. Can you imagine the fear in her life, in her mind, in her heart, trembling, going up to this wealthy, prominent, well-respected man of the culture there as a foreigner who has nothing? You've already given me so much by making sure I have food. Would you also take me as a wife? What fear must have pounded in her heart at the thought of making such a request, and what relief flooded through her when Boaz said yes. And I think he said it like that. Among the branches of Jesus' family tree, we find Ruth, whose name means friendship. We are reminded that just as Ruth was a foreigner, an enemy of God, of Israel, she was redeemed by a righteous man and became part of the family tree of Israel. In Jesus, we have been reconciled with God. Jesus takes the foreigner and makes them family. The message of Christmas calls the foreigners to become family. No longer are you outcasts. No longer do you need to tremble and worry. You are family. You get to come home, and that's part of that confidence. I know him. He knows me. We're on a first-name basis. In fact, I know his nickname. I don't know what that is. We live in a world that we need this close connection. Social media was supposed to fix that, and it helped drive it further apart. We want connection. And so we need to realize that just as much as we are foreigners and enemies to God, the call of Christmas is to come home and remember and remind yourself you are family to God. We live in a world that is seared with sin. Despite appearances to the contrary, most people carry a deep-seated sense of guilt. Every one of us has moments in our lives that we are ashamed of. If I asked you to think of one, I know you could pull one up. Man, I wish I'd never done that. If I could go back, I'd love to blot that away from my history and never have that happen. Painfully aware of the we intentionally chose a path which was wrong. For some, it's an ache that never entirely leaves them. And I wonder if this next person felt the same way. Verse 6, Jesse was the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah. One moment, Bathsheba is bathing, but a few hours later, she has fallen. Fallen from virtuous woman to shameless concubine. Fallen from faithful wife to guilty adulteress. Fallen from a nameless Jewess to a famous pariah of the Old Testament history. We usually focus on David, but Matthew made sure her name was listed here. So think for a moment. Did she go home immediately? Did she cry herself to sleep? Did she plead with God for forgiveness? Did she shudder at the thought? She hoped no one would ever know? Did she wonder, is he going to do this again? Is he going to call again? Did she start thinking about her husband? Did she wrestle with, how do I tell him? Do I tell him? What do I do? Now, Bathsheba does not bear the guilt alone at all. But she does bear some guilt. More than a month passes before she sends a message to the king, I'm pregnant. The sin of that night, the consequences carry a heavy weight for Bathsheba, the fallen one, but the weight has not reached its crushing load. First, there'll be news of her husband who has been killed in battle at the command of the king to help conceal the sin. So here she is, wearing a scarlet letter, and then the one who helped cause the scarlet letter causes her more grief by killing her husband, the only one who truly loved her. And then the consequences grow still. A short time after the birth, the child, the baby, grows sick and dies. And she is broken. But in God's graciousness, God permits Bathsheba a second child to live. He is given the name Solomon, but she calls him Jedediah, the one whom God loves. I don't know what I'm doing. It is through Solomon, the child born to Bathsheba, the scarlet woman, that the messianic line continues. It is through Bathsheba that we are reminded of God's plan of salvation does not come to perfect people because we're not perfect. The message of Christmas calls the fallen to become forgiven. And we need to remember that. I believe Matthew includes these women not because of what they share in common with Christ, but what we share in common with them. How many times have we worn a scarlet letter for something? I know growing up in the church, I had the big letter D on me because I was from a divorced home, and people treated me differently because of that. And no matter where I went, I didn't have a dad for the longest time. And people always give you that, oh, poor kid. And I hated it. I always had that. And I wanted to get rid of that. And when we've performed some sin, when we've done something and the world knows it and how we just want to get rid of it, God shows us through Bathsheba, you are not fallen anymore. You are forgiven. Your family, you have confidence, so come home for Christmas. For every one of us, we need to remember this. We are like some of these people in this dysfunctional family tree. They were sinful. They do not belong to be in the lineage into the family of Christ. They have nothing in value to bring to be honored in that family line. They were sinful, evil, dumb people, just like us. We are sinful. We know what it's like to be forsaken. We know what it's like to be fearful. We know what it's like to be a foreigner or an enemy. We know what it's like to wear the scarlet letter, to be fallen into our sins. We have nothing of value compared to the glory of God. We do not belong to be a part of the family. We are powerless to affect our situation. But for Christmas, but for the manger, for God's only begotten Son, but for the cross, Jesus was born in the likes of these of us. He was born so that I could become like him. Thankfully, the story doesn't end. Look in verse 7. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the father of Abijah. Abijah was the father of Asa. Asa was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat was the father of Jehoram. Jehoram was the father of Uzziah. Uzziah was the father of Jotham. Jotham was the father of Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh. Manasseh was the father of Amon. Amon, the father of Josiah. Josiah, the father of Jehoiakim. And his brothers, born in the time of the exile. Notice right there, not were they just in the line, they were also exiled. Another part of the broken tree. After the Babylonian exile, Jehoiakim was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the father of Abiud. Abiud was the father of Elakim. Elakim was the father of Azor. Azor was the father of Zadok. Zadok was the father of Akim. Akim was the father of Eliud. Eliud was the father of Eleazar. I said that one wrong too. Eleazar was the father of Methan. Methan was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary gave birth to Jesus, who is called the Messiah. True family, or the true message of Christmas, the true spirit of Christmas is relationship. And we just saw how this relationship from God through his promises, this message from God through his prophets, through his people saying, I don't care your past and problems. Come to me and I'll remove them. Come to me and I will remake you. And I will bring you into the family. I know you don't deserve it, but I will make it. I will produce it. Will you just come home for Christmas? I remember growing up, we would go down to my grandparents down in Colorado. And that whole time, I knew what was going to happen when I went through those doors into Grandma's house. Tears would be flooding down her eyes, and she would hug me and hurt me because she squeezed so hard. And she loved it when we came home. She loved it because we were together, and she knew that I knew family was so important. And coming home for Christmas was even better because not only did I get to see her and feel her, but I got the gifts from her. How much more do we need to realize that's what this is about, that we can come home for Christmas, that you can get the blessings, the gifts of being one of his sons or daughters, that you can get the blessings of having God saying, you know what, forget all that, you are mine. And he wraps you up and says, you know what, feel the pain of my hug instead of the pain of sin and death. I would gladly feel the pain of my grandma's hug. How much more would I love to have God just wrap his arms around me and say, welcome home. You're going to do that this Christmas. This Christmas family tree that we just read through shows that we're all part of a faulty family here on this world. But we can come home to a perfect Father. We can come home to the warm embrace of God's family. Are you ready to come home for Christmas? We're going to stand and sing a song, and if you are, will you make that decision today?